Good morning, Mrs. Cook. I am here to hold you accountable.
I see. For what would you like to hold me accountable?
Accountable for student learning, Mrs. Cook.
I see. I thought I already was accountable for student learning. I am evaluated regularly by my principal. I also am in continuous dialogue with parents about how their children are doing.
I am talking about test scores, Mrs. Cook. We are going to hold you accountable with test scores.
I have heard about this. Most of my students already do well on the state tests.
Yes, but we want all of your students to do well on the state tests. That's why we are making the tests harder and changing the cut scores for proficiency.
How will that help more of my students do well on the tests?
Mrs. Cook, that is status quo thinking. We need your students to get higher test scores. We need them to be globally competitive.
We emphasize cooperation in this classroom.
We need your students to beat Russia. I mean Japan. I mean China. We need your students to get higher test scores. That is why we are getting new tests and making them harder.
I see.
We need your students to get higher test scores. Other states are beating us on NAEP. We need your students to beat Massachusetts and Finland. That is why I am here to hold you accountable.
I teach many students who live in poverty or do not speak English or have special needs. Will I be held accountable just like teachers with less challenging students?
Yes, you will. We want all students to get higher test scores. Mrs. Cook, please do not succumb to the soft bigotry of low expectations.
I have very high expectations for all of my students. But I know that the playing field is not level for all of my students.
Poverty is not destiny, Mrs. Cook. We need your students to get higher test scores. We have invested a lot of money in these tests. Do not worry. We have a complex statistical formula that takes into account the fact that your students come from more challenging backgrounds.
I have read about these formulas in research journals. Our top researchers and national experts say that the formulas are unreliable and highly volatile. Sometimes year-to-year variation can be as high as 50 or 60%. That means that I would be held accountable for random variation that is out of my control.
Perhaps. But an imperfect measure is better than no measure. We need your students to get higher test scores. Other states are using these formulas. They are having no problems.
That is not what I have read. I have read about teachers of the year being rated unsatisfactory. I have read about teachers committing suicide. I have read that many teachers are leaving the profession because the formulas are unfair.
Mrs. Cook, that is status quo thinking. Many states already are implementing these formulas. We need a complex statistical formula also so that we can hold you accountable. It will be no problem.
I do not think it is fair to hold me accountable for factors outside of my control.
Do not worry. We also will use other measures which correlate highly with test scores. We will call this using multiple measures, and it will be fair.
I see.
Mrs. Cook, please do not defend the status quo. This is for the children. We need your students to get higher test scores. I have received a lot of money from Students First.
I want my students to be critical thinkers.
We need your students to get higher test scores. I have received a lot of money from ALEC.
I want my students to be problem solvers.
We want to get an NCLB waiver, so we must hold you accountable.
I want my students to be effective collaborators.
Michelle rewrote a newspaper article that said that you must be held accountable.
I want my students to be kind, compassionate people who care about others and make a difference in the world.
I read a blog post the other day that said that you must be held accountable.
I want my students to find their academic passions and be able to explore them.
Some wealthy people said that you should be held accountable.
My principal gives me feedback about how I can improve my teaching. So do my teaching peers.
That is not objective. Only test scores are objective. We need your students to get higher test scores. We have a big contract with Pearson.
Campbell's law says that the more a quantitative indicator is used for decision-making, the more it will distort and corrupt the social processes it is intended to monitor. That is why we see teaching to the test and testing scandals.
Mrs. Cook, that is status quo thinking. This is for the children. Don't you want to raise to the top?
You do not seem to like, or trust, teachers very much.
Of course I like teachers. My polling numbers say that I should, and I am running for re-election. But we need your students to get higher test scores, Mrs. Cook. We need to hold you accountable.
Once a year test scores do not give me helpful feedback on how to improve my teaching.
Do not worry. We will create more tests so that students can take them more than once a year. We have a big contract with Pearson.
I am worried that my students will spend too much time taking tests. When am I supposed to teach?
Do not worry. There will still be a few days left for you to teach. Maybe we will lengthen the school day or school year. You will not need a raise. After all, you get summers off.
Do you hear that dripping sound? Because of budget cuts, my school can't afford to fix the leak in the roof, purchase computers, or buy books for the library.
Do not worry. We have plenty of money for more tests. And for charter schools. You can go teach in one of those. Plus some wealthy people who gave me a donation got a tax cut.
I think that this may be my last year as a teacher. I think I may leave and go do something else.
Do not worry. We will put students first. We will hire temp agents from Teach for America. This is for the children. I watched a TED Talk by Bill Gates that said so.
I see.
Mrs. Cook, before you go, our data show that teacher morale is at an all-time low. We are having trouble attracting excellent teacher candidates. Do you know anyone who might want to be a teacher?